Hey guys, tonight we wander beneath a ceiling of green where the trees have swallowed cities and the air carries secrets thousands of years old. A place once filled with stone pyramids, carved stelae, processions under stars, now silent except for the hum of insects and distant howler monkeys. In 1839, an American lawyer named John Lloyd Stevens stepped into this tangled world and wrote, "These immense ruins all speak of a people advanced in the arts of civilization. But who were they? And why did they disappear?" The Petén Basin in present-day Guatemala is a dense, humid lowland where vines swallow stone faster than time records it. Yet here, beneath the green veil, lie the bones of a lost world. Tikal, El Mirador, Calakmulanse, bustling cities with wide causeways, observatories, and plazas that echoed with ritual and rule. The Maya didn't vanish overnight. They lived, loved, ruled, revolted, then changed. But to understand collapse, we must first see the peak. Around 250 to 900 CE during the Classic period, the Maya built one of the most sophisticated civilizations in pre-Columbian America. They had no metal tools, no wheels, and no draft animals. But they mapped the cosmos with alarming precision, constructed temples that still align with solstices, and developed a writing system of glyphs so intricate that even now, only about 85% of it has been fully deciphered. They were not a single empire, but a web of city-states, each ruled by divine kings known as Kahul-Lajaw. These kings weren't just leaders. They were living links between the human and the divine. They communicated with gods through rituals that often involved bloodletting. The royal body was literally a vessel for cosmic order. What's lesser known is that many of these rituals were performed on raised stone platforms, deliberately built to lift the king closer to the sky gods. These structures weren't just for visibility, they were cosmic stages. Archaeologists today still debate whether these kings were truly seen as divine or simply used religion to reinforce power. Some glyphs describe rulers as lords of the four directions, suggesting cosmic authority. Others are more ambiguous. As one Mayanist wrote, "We are not yet sure where theology ends and propaganda begins." At its height, Tikal alone may have held 100,000 people sustained by sophisticated agriculture. The Maya didn't just plant, they engineered their land. Swamps were converted into seasonally managed raised fields, and forests were selectively thinned to allow cultivation beneath the canopy. This mosaic landscape, once thought wild, was deeply managed. Yet, evidence shows that even at their peak, there were cracks forming beneath the surface. Hieroglyphic records from Tikal describe years of drought. Other inscriptions speak of wars with neighboring Calakmul. Meanwhile, sediment cores from nearby lakes show spikes in phosphates and charcoal, indicators of deforestation and runoff. The very systems that supported grandeur were straining. Still, to walk through these cities, even in ruins, is to feel awe. In Copán, the hieroglyphic stairway tells over 2,000 years of dynastic history in a single carved ascent. In Palenque, King Pakal's tomb lies beneath a pyramid that perfectly channels rainfall like a sacred lung. And in Yaxchilan, stelae depict queens performing bloodletting to open portals to the underworld of practice, nearly unmatched in archaeological record for its intensity and symbolism. Yet in the end, even these epicenters faded. When the Spanish arrived centuries later, They found no memory of these cities among the Maya descendants. The jungle had claimed not just stone, but story. And that raises the question we'll follow like a thread through the next chapters. Did the Maya collapse from within her? Was it the world around them that changed too fast to keep up? Tonight, we walk quietly through stone corridors, choked with vines, reading fragments in glyphs and pollen, listening not just for answers, but for the weight of the question itself. The sun rose differently over the Mayan world. It wasn't just the start of another day, it was a cosmic event, a sacred act repeating across the sky. For the Maya, time wasn't linear. It was cyclical, layered, recursive. The gods didn't just dwell above, they moved through calendars. The Maya tracked time with breathtaking precision. They developed multiple interlocking calendar systems, the most famous being the Tzolk'in, a 260-day ritual calendar, and the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar. Together, these formed the calendar round, which cycled every 52 years. And beyond that, the long counter-linear calendar reaching across thousands of years. You might recognize a famous long count date, 13.0.0.0.2000. Oh, the 21st of December, 2012. A moment many believed would mark the end of the world. But in reality for the Maya, this was simply the end of one Baktun and the beginning of another. A cycle closing and a new one beginning. Their calendars weren't just tools. They were living cosmologies. Every number, every glyph, every celestial event was tied to gods, rituals, and kingship. When rulers were born, married, crowned, or buried, their dates were meticulously carved into stone, often aligning with solar eclipses, Venus's movements, or equinoxes. And here lies something astonishing. The Maya tracked the movements of Venus so precisely that they calculated its synodic cycle at 584 days, almost exactly correct. All this with no telescopes, no metal instruments. Just eyes, sky, and time. But why Venus? Because, to the Maya, Venus wasn't just a star. It was the god Chak-Ek, and its appearance was often associated with warfare and sacrifice. Many cities scheduled raids or coronations based on Venus's rise as the morning star. In one temple in Bonampak, a mural shows a noblewoman performing bloodletting, while Venus shines above a chilling conjunction of cosmos and duty. This leads to a lesser-known fact. The Maya were not peaceful sky watchers. Their astronomy was not for passive observation. It was often a tool for governance and war. And this is where things become more intricate. By aligning major events with cosmic phenomena, rulers weren't just showing reverence, they were claiming divine timing. Imagine declaring war not on impulse, but on the night Venus returned after 584 days of absence. That's not just strategy, that's theater and faith. But modern scholars still debate how much of this was intentional calculation versus post hoc inscription. Did rulers truly schedule actions with celestial precision, or did they later craft narratives to fit the stars? As one archaeologist put it, Maya rulers weren't just managing cities, they were curating myth. At the heart of this was the E group, a specific architectural configuration found at many Mayan sites. These complexes were aligned with the sun's rising position at solstices and equinoxes. From these vantage points, elites could literally watch the world reset, reinforcing their role as intermediaries between Earth and sky. In UX Acton, for instance, an E group allows the viewer to see the sun rise directly over specific temples during the solstice. It's not just architecture, it's a calendar built from stone. Yet there's a quiet tension here. Even as these cosmologies dazzled, they also locked the society into rigid expectations. If a ruler was crowned under a wrong star, or if Venus returned without victory, what then? Some historians suggest that cosmic failure might have shaken political legitimacy, leading to unrest or even rebellion. And during the terminal classic period, when collapse began creeping in, there is a notable drop in astronomical inscriptions. Was this loss of celestial control part of the unraveling? Or did they simply stop believing? So tonight, as you drift deeper into thought, picture this. A priest stands atop a pyramid, arms raised to the sky. Below, the city waits. Venus is about to rise. The stars are watching, and time-layered, sacred, eternal turns another page. It is a warm evening in Palenque. The scent of copal smoke drifts through the plaza, curling around limestone pillars engraved with the deeds of kings. Flickering torches light the carved faces of rulers past. But tonight, all eyes are on one figure, the Kuhul Ajaw, the Holy King. His headdress towers like a mountain. His cloak rustles with jade beads, and in his hand he holds a stingray spine. This is not a coronation. It's a bloodletting ritual. And what's about to unfold isn't just personal, it's cosmic. In Maya civilization, kingship was not merely political. It was divine responsibility. The ruler didn't just govern land or people. He maintained balance between worlds. The king was a human conduit, entrusted with negotiating between the living and the divine, the seen and unseen. To do this, Maya rulers performed intense and deeply symbolic acts, the most dramatic of which was bloodletting. Using sharpened obsidian blades or stingray spines, kings and queens would draw blood from their tongues, ears, or even genitals, collecting it on bark paper. The blood-soaked paper was then burned in a ceremonial bowl, releasing smoke believed to form a portala temporary bridge between worlds. From this smoke, the godsor, the spirits of ancestors, could emerge. And here's something few know. Many carved lintels show rulers in trance states, their eyes half closed, emerging serpents swirling from the smoke. These aren't myths, they're depictions of ritual events. In Yaxchilan's famous Lintel 25, Queen Lady Zook kneels as a visioned serpent rises before her, jaws open wide, a warrior spirit emerging from its mouth. To modern eyes, this looks surreal, even mythical. But to the Maya, it was real and necessary. The practice served many purposes: spiritual, social, political. Each drop of royal blood reaffirmed legitimacy, divine favor, and dynastic continuity. The act itself reminded the people that their leader was willing to suffer not in war, but in ritual vulnerability for the sake of cosmic order. And that's key. The body of the king was a symbol. It was a text, one written not just in blood, but in genealogy. Inscriptions across Maya cities often begin with ancestral lines, connecting a current ruler to divine origins or mythic figures. Even their names were dense cosmograms, designed to link a ruler's identity with celestial patterns or supernatural beings. For example, Pakal the Great of Palenque didn't just claim royal descent, His sarcophagus lid shows him falling into or ascending from the underworld, surrounded by cosmic imagery. Scholars still debate the meaning. Is he becoming a god, returning to his ancestors, reenacting the birth of the cosmos? There is no single answer, because, as some researchers note, Maya iconography speaks in layers, not lines. But amid the grandeur lies a subtler truth. These rituals weren't just for the elite. They were also performance for the people. Crowds gathered in plazas to witness royal ceremonies. The visual language, bright costumes, towering masks, rhythmic chants, spirals of incense was designed to evoke awe and affirm cosmic order. Yet, this also raises the question, what happens when the ritual no longer resonates? When a bad harvest or a failed war undermines the claim to divinity? Some archaeologists suggest that excessive ritualization may have eventually worked against rulers, especially during environmental or political crises. If the people saw their king bleed, fast, burn offerings, and yet the rains didn't come, doubt could grow. Reverence might shift to resentment. Historians still debate this. Was the royal body always enough to stabilize society? Or did belief, once broken, unravel the fabric of power? Whatever the case, one thing is clear. The Maya king was not simply born to rule. He had to suffer to be believed. So picture this now. A stone platform, a torchlit crowd, a thin trail of smoke rising from a ceremonial bowl, and a ruler, silent, eyes glazed, watching a vision unfold in the sky only he can see. This was power, and also its burden. The city is unusually quiet. No chanting from the temple steps, no drumming echoing across the plaza. The scribes pause in their carving. The market stalls are half empty. Heads tilt skyward, because something is missing, something fundamental. The sky is silent. The Maya were among the most advanced sky watchers of the ancient world. For centuries, they recorded eclipses, lunar cycles, equinoxes, and most famously, the path of Venus. Their calendars were built on celestial patterns, and their power structures echoed those rhythms. But beginning in the late 8th century CE, something shifted. Across several major cities, astronomical records start to dwindle. E-group observatories fall out of use. Fewer inscriptions mention planetary events. What had once been daily reverence becomes scattered, almost hesitant. Why? Historians still debate this. One theory suggests natural disruption, a series of prolonged cloud cover events, perhaps tied to volcanic eruptions elsewhere, dimmed the skies for months or years at a time. Such phenomena, known from ice core records, would have rendered celestial observations difficult, if not impossible. Another theory points inward: political fragmentation. As regional rivalries intensified, resources once devoted to cosmic tracking were diverted to warfare. Priests who once spent decades calculating eclipses may have been pulled into courtly power plays or displaced entirely. And there's a subtler possibility: loss of faith. In a society so deeply rooted in cosmology, when celestial patterns began to misalign with lived reality's crop failures, social unrest, unpredictable rains, the people may have started to doubt the order of the heavens. And if the sky could no longer be trusted, what then of the kings who claimed to speak its language? One particularly haunting example comes from the city of Quirigua. In its final phase of building, the city erected a series of massive stelatum of the tallest in the Mayan world. But these monuments are almost entirely devoid of astronomical references. Instead, they focus on historical warfare and dynastic lineage, as if trying to reaffirm human power where cosmic authority had begun to waver. Meanwhile, at Tikal, stargazing towers fell into disuse. Inscriptions that once tracked Venus's every movement shift toward military campaigns and supply logistics. The cosmos receded. The earth tense, hungry, political, took its place. Some scholars suggest that this period represents a cosmic Crisisa disconnect between worldview and reality. The Maya didn't separate science from religion. They lived in a seamless cosmology. And so, when the stars no longer aligned with expectation, the consequence wasn't just practical, it was existential. Still, there's nuance here. Not all cities lost their celestial connection. Copán, for instance, continued to track lunar phases deep into its decline. And in smaller communities, household-level astronomy persisted. Families still watched the skies for planting cues, even if the temples above them stood empty. One particularly curious find? A set of clay figurines buried in a late-period household altar, each one aligned with solstice sunrise, when placed on a certain shelf. No inscriptions, no grandeur, just quiet continuity. And that's something the history books sometimes miss. Collapse does not mean forgetting. It often means rewiring. So, as the royal astronomers fade into silence and the great observatories crumble, the stars do not stop moving. They keep rising, keep setting, but now, perhaps, without witnesses. And the Pio Pleno longer told what Venus means, or what year the world will reset, begin to interpret the sky for themselves. Less as scripture, more as story. The heavens once whispered kings into power. Now they hang, quiet and unclaimed, above cities beginning to falter. And in that silence, perhaps the first echoes of collapse begin. In the lowland forests of what is now Guatemala and southern Mexico, the fields once rolled green and wide. Rows of maize rose with the sun, beans twined around their stalks, and squash blanketed the soil beneath a symphony of cultivation, perfected over centuries. But then, the harvests began to fail. This wasn't sudden. There were no headlines carved in stone saying, "Famine begins." But year by year the yields dropped. The rains came late, or not at all. And what had once been an ecosystem in harmony slowly began to turn against itself. Archaeobotanists today study pollen from lake beds in regions like Petén Itzá. In deeper layers, they find evidence of lush forests. But starting around the 8th century CE, those layers shift, showing a surge in corn pollen, a drastic drop in hardwood species, and finally, signs of soil degradation and erosion. What does this mean? It tells a quiet but devastating story. The Maya over-farmed their land. To feed growing urban populations, Tikal, Caracol, Copán vast tracts of forest were cleared. Swamps were drained, and hillside plots were terraced. In some areas, even steep slopes were planted. For a while, these innovations worked. Cities thrived, populations grew, but the system was fragile. Without forests, the thin tropical soil lost its nutrients faster. Rainfall, once absorbed gently by roots and leaf litter, now ran off quickly eroding topsoil. And as agricultural productivity declined, pressure mounted on nearby lands. What's rarely discussed is how advanced the Maya were in adapting. They didn't simply wait for disaster. In areas like Pull Trouser Swamp in Belize, they constructed raised field-elevated plots surrounded by canals to manage water and prevent flooding. These were smart, labor-intensive, and effective. But even these weren't enough in the face of long-term climate stress. Because, parallel to this agricultural overreach, climate records from speleothems, cave stalactites, and lake cores show a prolonged drought period beginning around 820 CE. The Yucatan Peninsula, heavily reliant on seasonal rains, began to dry. No rivers cut through this limestone world. Water came from cenotes and seasonal collection. When the rains failed, so did the reservoirs. So did the cities. One inscription from Dos Pilas hints at a year without the rains. Another glyph from Naranjo references an offering to the rain god Cock during a hot sky season. Whether these were isolated events or signs of systemic change, historians still debate. But the archaeological record leaves little doubt. Agriculture was breaking down, and with it, the foundations of power. Because what held these city-states together was not just blood and stone, it was food. Kings distributed maize, temples stored beans. Festivals were timed to planting and harvest. When the fields stopped giving, the gods grew silent, and the people began to ask questions. One little-known detail. In several cities, granaries were found converted into defensive structures, stone walls, hastily reinforced, storage rooms sealed with rubble. Some scholars suggest this points to food hoarding, or perhaps resource raids between rival factions. And here's where things turn darkly poetic. The same fields that once fed divine kings now became battlegrounds of hunger. Some historians argue that civil unrest may have begun in the agricultural margins and villages, watching their soil turn to dust, watching tribute carts grow lighter, waiting for rain that never came. Discontent would have trickled inward toward the cities, where power sat high but supply ran thin. Yet, it wasn't just drought. It wasn't just poor planning. It was the intersection of natural stress and social structurea civilization, so attuned to cycles that when those cycles broke, so did trust. As one scholar put it, the Maya mastered their environment until it changed. So picture it now, a dry canal, cracked earth beneath, a farmer kneeling where water once pooled, eyes lifted to a silent sky. Fields that once gave everything now give nothing. And somewhere, in a palace not far away, a king stares at empty grain jars and wonders, how long can power last? When the ground no longer listens, it begins with smoke in the hills, not from cooking fires, but from something sharper. A warning, a siege, a message no courier will carry. Across the Maya lowlands, as the crops withered and the skies grew dry, another kind of pressure tightened, intercity warfare. Rival city-states, once locked in ritualized contests and dynastic posturing, now turned on each other with renewed desperation. This wasn't new. The Maya world had always been fragmented a landscape of independent polities. Tikal, Calakmul, Karakol, Copán, dozens more. Each city with its own kuhul ajah, its own origin myths, its own claim to divine favor. Alliances were formed and broken, tribute flowed, battles were fought. But until the 8th century, this web had a rhythm of balance. And then it broke. Inscriptions from the late Classic period, especially between 760 and 830 CE, show a spike in hostile language. Cities no longer just visited or conquered. They began to obliterate. Glyphs speak of Star Wars, a euphemism for surprise attacks timed with celestial events. Others reference the death of the Holy Lord, or the taking of the flint shield, a poetic phrase for sacking a city. In the past, kings might be captured and then returned as a show of prestige. But now, decapitation of enemy rulers becomes more frequent in the carvings. Cities began targeting not just palaces but water sources, trade routes, and even royal tombs. This shift suggests something deeper than typical warfare. It suggests existential fear. As resources dwindled, food, labor, divine favoricities likely saw aggression as the only path to survival. And with divine legitimacy already cracking under drought and crop failure, violence replaced ritual as the language of authority. One example stands stark: the rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul. For centuries, these two giants vied for supremacy. But by the late 700s, their wars took on a new intensity. Smaller allies were swallowed up. Border cities like Dos Pilas changed hands multiple times. The glyphs from Dos Pilas paint a grim picture: betrayals, forced abdications, royal exiles. In one text, a captured king is marched through the jungle, bound, humiliated before a rival altar. Another chilling pattern appears: dynastic collapse. Lineages that had ruled for centuries simply vanish from the record. No more heirs, no more royal births. In their place, short-lived rulers, often installed during wartime, sometimes with no blood link to the founding families. These were strong men, not sacred kings. And where lineages collapsed, so too did cities. Copán, once a beacon of art and architecture, fell into disrepair after its 16th ruler. Inscriptions stop. Temples remain unfinished. A population once numbering in the tens of thousands dwindled rapidly. Yet amid this chaos, a curious detail: in some cities, defensive architecture increases. Walls grow thicker, moats appear. Elevated walkways are destroyed, perhaps, to prevent enemy access. This suggests not just raids, but sustained siege warfare, a shift from quick skirmishes to prolonged conflict. Still, historians don't fully agree on how widespread this warfare was. Some believe these were isolated civil wars. Others suggest a regional cascade, that as one city fell, the next turned violent in fear of being next. A few even argue that the glyphs overstate the brutality as political propaganda. But what's harder to dismiss is the archaeology. Mass graves with trauma marks. Villages burned, not rebuilt. Monuments toppled and smashed intentionally. In places like Aguateca, residents seem to have fled suddenly, leaving tools and ceramics behind. The walls of elite homes show signs of assault. Some doorways were barricaded with stone last-minute defenses that didn't hold. And then, silence. Not everywhere. Not all at once, but enough. Because war, even sacred war, cannot sustain a world. Not when the gods fall quiet, not when the fields dry up, not when the kings bleed and no rain comes. So imagine it now. Two cities, one rising in smoke, the other watching from afar, knowing it could be next. Messengers dispatched, alliances whispered, temples closed, children sent to safer grounds. And a question, carved not into stone, but into the hearts of those who remained. Is the world ending? Or are we just forgetting how to hold it together? In the quiet heart of the Yucatan Peninsula, a limestone cliff stands watch over a dried-out lake bed. For centuries, it's remained untouched, layered in stillness. But when scientists arrived in the 1990s, they came not with trowels or brushes, but with drills. Their goal? Not ruins, climate records. They drilled deep into the earth, retrieving long cylindrical cores of mud and sediment. Each layer told a different story. Dust, pollen, volcanic ash. And in one layer thin, white, and persistent signs of something devastating. A drought that lasted decades. One of the strongest pieces of evidence for the Maya collapse being linked to climate comes not from glyphs or legends, but from paleoclimatology, the study of past climates using geological and biological data. Cores taken from Lake Chichancanab, yes, that's its real name, showed a clear and prolonged drop in rainfall, beginning around 820 CE and extending through the 9th century. Not a single year of dry weather, not even 10, but nearly a century of inconsistent, often catastrophic drought. This was more than weather. It was a systemic unraveling. The Maya lowlands, unlike other parts of Mesoamerica, had no major rivers. Water was stored in reservoirs, cenotes, and Chultensman-made cisterns carved into rock. When the rains failed, these systems began to falter. Lakes shrank, springs dried, crops failed repeatedly. Interestingly, this wasn't the first time drought had hit the region. There's evidence of a similar dry spell around 200 CE. The difference was scale and vulnerability. By 800 CE, the Maya population was much larger, their cities denser, and their ecosystems more strained. Here's something few talk about. Some Maya cities responded with hydraulic innovation. In places like Tikal, massive reservoirs were re-engineered lined with plaster, connected by aqueducts. These weren't primitive solutions. They showed planning, knowledge, adaptation, but even the best engineering can't make rainfall. In the absence of water, other strategies emerged. Evidence from the city of Calakmul suggests a sudden shift in ceremonial timing, possibly to align with drought rituals. Glyphs referencing the rain god Chek increase during this time. Offerings at cave altars grow more intensicopal resin, stingray spines, even jade buried in dry cenotes. There is a haunting theory. As the drought worsened, the people sacrificed, more hoping to call the sky back to life. But it never answered. And here, too, lies a scholarly debate. Some argue that the drought was the final trigger in a long series of cascading failures: agriculture, war, overpopulation, political instability. Others suggest that climate change was central, the single most powerful force. As one climatologist put it, without water, nothing else. Matters not glyphs, not kings, not stone. But there's also a quieter school of thought, one that sees the drought not as destruction, but as transformation. Because not all cities fell. In the Puk Hills, cities like Uxmal and Kaba flourished briefly during the collapse period, possibly due to better soils or local rain patterns. This suggests that the Maya weren't wiped out. They adapted, moved, restructured. Still, the core lowlands, the political heart of the classic Maya, were not so lucky. By 900 CE, many of the great cities were empty. Temples stood silent. Stelae were left uncarved. The jungle began to reclaim what had once been cleared. And yet, when you walk these paths today, the drought doesn't speak in thunder or fire. It speaks in absence. Dry cisterns, abandoned terraces, a silence that settles in like dust. Imagine it now. A reservoir once lined with white plaster, now cracked and bone dry. Children carrying empty pots, following paths that once led to water. A priest in a carved cave, whispering to a god who no longer answers. And overhead, a sky full of stars. But no rain. The people looked up, and nothing came down. In the highland valleys near the modern border of Honduras and Guatemala lies a city once full of music, carving, and ritual, the city of Copán. Today, its ruins sit in soft shadow, watched over by stone heads and moss. But once, Copán was a jewel of the Maya world, known for its refined art, its lineage of powerful kings, and its sacred stairway carved with history itself. And yet, it fell. Not all at once, not in flames, but gradually, like a flame flickering out over too many nights. Copán is one of the most documented cases of urban decline in Maya archaeology. It offers a window into not just how collapse happened, but what it may have felt like to live through it. At its height in the 8th century, Copán was ruled by Yaks Pasaj Chan Yopat, the 16th in a dynastic line stretching back centuries. He inherited a city of monumental pyramids, ritual courts, observatories, and a vast population. Some estimates place it near 20,000 within the valley. The city was known for its hieroglyphic stairway, 63 steps, over 2,000 glyphs, the longest known Maya text. It recorded royal achievements and myths meant to bind time to rule. But archaeological layers tell a quieter, grimmer story beneath the grandeur. Core samples from household middens show a shift in diet from fish and high-status meats to lower-calorie tubers and small animals. Dental evidence reveals signs of malnutrition, even in elite burials. Waste disposal patterns suggest that sanitation deteriorated and construction slowed. It's in these small signs, not just toppled temples, but empty kitchens that collapse, begins to show its human face. One little-known fact: Copa's elite continued to build monuments even as the city crumbled around them. Yaks Pasaj commissioned new temples and stelae well into the period of decline, perhaps trying to preserve the illusion of stability. The glyphs grew more grandiose, even as the population shrank. Historians point to this as a kind of performative power, late attempt to maintain authority through image when substance had begun to fail. One archaeologist described it as a court performing its own myth as the walls fell inward. Meanwhile, outside the elite core, the picture darkens. Commoner dwellings began to cluster closer to the city center, likely due to security fears. Deforestation intensified as more land was cleared to feed the city. But as trees vanished, so did the topsoil Copán sits in a valley highly susceptible to erosion. With crops failing and trade slowing, the city began to hollow out. And then, perhaps most tellingly, the inscriptions stop. After a final flurry of texts around 822 CE, there are no more carved dates, no more royal deeds, no more sky and earth metaphors. The final stela of Copán is oddly blank half-finished, the glyphs only outlined, never chiseled. Was the carver interrupted? Did funding run out? Did belief falter? Scholars still debate. Some suggest the artisan died before completing the work. Others think it was a symbolic Gesturean admission that the story could no longer be told. One even proposed that it was an intentional ending, a ritual pause of history itself. Whatever the truth, the silence speaks volumes. By the early 10th century, Copán was nearly abandoned. A few people remained in its outskirts, farming small plots. But the great plazas were empty, the rulers forgotten. The stairways no longer climbed. And yet, curiously, nothing burned. There is no evidence of conquest. No skeletons strewn in the courtyards. No fire-scorched temples. Just slow decay. Stone by stone, story by story. This makes Copán different from cities like Dos Pilas or Aguateca, which ended in violence. It suggests a gradual collapse, driven by internal strain over population, environmental damage, loss of legitimacy. Collapse here was not explosive. It was quiet, and perhaps all the more haunting for that. So imagine this. A sculptor sits beneath a scaffold, his chisel halfway through a glyph. The plaza around him is half empty. The sun is lower than it should be, and somewhere behind him, a temple priest folds up the last scroll, not knowing if it will ever be read again. A city doesn't die in a single day. It forgets itself. Slowly. At first, there's no alarm, no sudden collapse, no clear moment when it all comes undone. But one day, a priest approaches the temple and finds it locked, or crumbling, or simply unvisited. The offerings stop, the incense doesn't burn, and the voices, once lifted in chant, grow silent. This is how belief erodes not with disbelief, but with disuse. Across the Maya world, as cities emptied and dynasties fell, the great temples began to go quiet. These were once the beating hearts of Maya life, high platforms reaching into the sky, temples capped with sanctuaries, their walls painted in vibrant reds and blues, echoing with ritual music, bloodletting, and sacred words. They stood as portals between worlds human and divine, living and dead, past and future. But as political systems collapsed, so too did their ability to maintain ritual continuity. One of the clearest signs of decline in spiritual life comes not from what's present, but from what's missing. In later archaeological layers of temples like those in Tikal and Yaxchilan, ceremonial caches, previously full of jade, obsidian, shell, and copal, start to vanish. The layers become poor, sparse. Instead of royal offerings, there are broken pots, burnt corn, in some cases, just ashes. It's not that belief disappeared, but the infrastructure of belief the elites, the scribes, the calendars, the cosmic pageantry began to decay. One surprising detail. In many cities, altars were repurposed, used not for ritual, but as household grinding stones. Sacred architecture became pragmatic. Gods, once petitioned with blood, were now replaced by hands turning maize into masa. Scholars continued to debate what this shift really meant. Some argue it was the decentralization of religiona, spiritual movement from the temples back to the households. That doesn't mean the Maya stopped believing. Rather, they may have localized their rituals, adapting them to survive in smaller, more isolated communities. Others see it as evidence of a crisis of faith. If the kings were divine, and the temples the seats of cosmic order, what happens when the crops fail and the kings vanish? Did the gods abandon the people, or did the people begin to abandon the gods? There's no easy answer. But in the architectural record, you can sense the emotional tension. Take the Temple of the Inscriptions in Palenque. Once meticulously maintained, its last stages show evidence of structural neglect. Stones left unpolished, roof combs left incomplete. Even the burial chamber of King Pakal was sealed not with reverence, but with rubble perhaps to keep out looters, or perhaps as a symbol that the door to the divine was closing. One eerie detail. In the final phase of Tikal's Great Plaza, the stelae were no longer carved. Instead, they were erected blank. This has puzzled researchers for decades. Some see it as a lack of skilled scribes. Others believe it was intentional, symbolizing an end of history, a ritual full stop. Because, in Maya cosmology, to stop recording time was to unwrite the world. Yet amid this silence, not everything faded. In remote areas, small temples continued to be built. Some bore simple stucco masks of the maize god or Hak, the rain deity. In caves, offerings continued charcoal, feathers, seeds left by those who had no more access to the high pyramids, but still sought divine reciprocity. There's something quietly heroic in that. People holding on to faith with whatever they had left. And in some places, the gods themselves seemed to shift. New forms appeared less regal, more local, less tied to empire, more rooted in earth, water, daily survival. The theater of kingship gave way to the intimacy of household altars. And so, as you walk through these temples today, stone cracked and vines curling through what were once sacred doorways, you may feel not just loss, but transition. Because temples didn't fall, they faded. And in that fading, the sacred changed shape. Imagine it. A small boy walks into a temple with his grandmother. She places corn on the altar not for the king, but for the rain. No scribes, no processions, just whispered words, just hope. And in that whisper, the old gods still listen, just more quietly than before. As the temples grew quiet and kings fell from their thrones, not everyone disappeared. For every royal burial sealed in haste, for every glyph left uncarved, there were thousands of Maya farmers, artisans, midwives, traders who stayed. They stayed when the rituals ended. They stayed when the roads crumbled. They stayed when the jungle began to take back what stone had claimed. Because while history often records the fall of dynasties, it forgets the people who lived beneath them. The post-collapse period in the Maya lowlands is one of the most understudied yet deeply human chapters in the region's history. Cities didn't all empty at once. Instead, they fragmented urban centers shrank. Elite architecture ceased, but rural populations often remained. In places like Sable and Lamanai, archaeological evidence shows that commoners adapted. Stone homes were replaced with perishable materials, thatch roofs, packed earth floors, wooden supports. Ceremonial centers were abandoned, but family compounds persisted. In some cases, fields were reoriented to follow new rain patterns, indicating environmental awareness and flexibility. One discovery stands out. In the ruins of a modest household near the edge of a once grand plaza in Caracol, archaeologists uncovered a small altar. No jade, no glyphs, just worn ceramic bowls, a few carved shells, and a single smooth stone likely touched by generations of hands. This was not abandonment. This was reorganization. It challenges the idea of total collapse. While elite systems disintegrated, daily life continued, reshaped by necessity. Children were still born. Corn was still ground. Stories were still told under the stars. Interestingly, some regions saw population movements rather than decline. People left vulnerable, drought-stricken cities and migrated toward more sustainable areas, higher ground, better springs, more shaded forests. This process wasn't a retreat into chaos, but a return to resilience. One cold detail many miss. Burials during this time become more modest, but also more personal. Grave goods shift from royal emblems to domestic tool spindles, maize kernels, clay figurines. These were offerings not to kings or gods, but to ancestors, a more intimate spiritual economy. And while inscriptions vanish from temples, oral tradition likely flourished. Stories passed not in stone, but in song, in gesture, in the slow rhythm of hands shaping tortillas. As one ethnographer once wrote, "The Maya world did not fall. It folded itself inward like a seed." Of course, this period is not well preserved. Without large stone buildings or elite texts, much of what happened was archaeologically invisible. And yet, through chemical analysis of soil, radiocarbon dating, and the rare find of a household altar or kitchen hearth, we can glimpse lives carried on in quiet strength. But the question still lingers in academic circles. Was this continuity deliberate or just survival? Did these communities consciously resist elite power, or did they simply adjust to new limits? There's no consensus. Some scholars argue that the decentralization of power may have been liberating, that commoners flourished without tribute demands, temple taxes, or forced labor. Others suggest it was a time of hardship, social cohesion fraying, traditions thinning, a world becoming smaller. Yet, as the canopy thickened over broken pyramids, people adapted in ways the kings could not. So tonight, picture not palaces, but porches. A woman grinding maize, humming a melody her grandmother once sang during a festival now forgotten. Children chasing fireflies through abandoned plazas, unaware that the stones beneath their feet once told the story of kings. A man planting seeds in a new field, whispering to the soil, like his ancestors once whispered to the gods. The Maya world didn't end. It simply changed shape, from temples to homes, from glyphs to memory, from power to presence. For centuries, the dominant narrative was clear. The Maya vanished. One day, great cities stood full of life. The next, they were swallowed by jungle. But that story is a myth of disappearance. Tidy tale, easier to tell than the truth, because the Maya never vanished. They endured, even as Copán collapsed, as Tikal's stele fell silent, and as royal lineages faded from memory, millions of Maya people continued to live, farm, speak, believe, and adapt. Their civilization didn't evaporate, it decentralized. It slipped out of stone courts and into hills, valleys, and forests, carried forward by people whose names never appeared in glyphs. And in many ways, it was the elite narrative that disappeared, not the culture itself. Today, over 6 million people in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras identify as Maya. They speak over 30 Maya languages. They grow maize in milpas, using the same intercropping techniques their ancestors did. They observe calendrical traditions, worship earth spirits, and visit sacred caves, some of which have been in continuous use for over 1,000 years. So why did we ever believe they were gone? The roots of that idea lie partly in how early European explorers and 19th century archaeologists interpreted ruins. When Stevens and Catherwood stumbled upon Copán and Palenque in the 1840s, they were astounded. They saw towering temples and complex inscriptions, and no living Maya elites who matched their expectations. So they assumed these must be the remains of a lost, extinct race. That assumption, blinded by colonial thinking, ignored the obvious. Maya people were all around them. They just weren't wearing jade masks or sitting on thrones. They were weaving, planting, and praying, as they had for generations. In the 20th century, the myth of disappearance slowly began to unravel. Archaeologists started to connect modern communities to ancient settlements. Linguists showed how classic glyphs reflected living languages. Ethnographers documented rituals in Chiapas and the Guatemalan highlands that traced directly back to pre-Columbian beliefs. One powerful example, the Quiche Maya Popol Vuh, a mythic narrative written down in the 16th century but passed orally for generations prior. It contains cosmologies that mirror classic-era creation stories such as the gods forming humans from maize, the sacred substance of life. Another overlooked thread, cave worship. Caves, in Maya cosmology, were portals to the underworld Xibalba. During the Classic period, elites made offerings in cave chambers deep underground. That practice never stopped. Even today, in places like Alta Verapaz or the hills of Chiapas, Maya families visit sacred caves, bringing candles, incense, and prayers to ancestral spirits. There's one story told by a modern Quechua Maya woman. Her grandmother led her to a cave on her 13th birthday. Inside, they lit 5 candles red, white, black, yellow, and blue for the 5 directions. She was told to ask for strength, wisdom, and corn. That ritual, she later learned, had been passed down for generations. It's not a revival. It's a continuation. And yet, even today, the Maya face challenges, discrimination, loss of land, cultural suppression. But their presence is a quiet resistance, a refusal to be erased by history books that still too often speak of disappearance. Academically, we now use the term post-classic Maya to describe the centuries following the classic collapse time, not of loss, but transformation. The focus shifts from towering cities to coastal trade ports like Chichen Itza and Tulum, and to resilient highland communities that resisted even Spanish conquest for generations. In fact, one of the last independent Maya states, the Itza Kingdom of Tayasal, held out until 1697, more than 150 years after the fall of the Aztec Empire. So tonight, picture, not the jungle reclaiming stone, but people reclaiming identity. A child learning quiche words in a school built on a hill where kings once stood. A grandmother weaving a huipil with symbols that echo centuries of cosmology. A boy watching Venus rise over his village, just as his ancestors did, and thinking, it's still there, we're still here. The Maya didn't fall. They simply stepped out of stone and into the present. The jungle, for all its mystery and menace, has long been the Maya's unexpected ally. It is easy to imagine collapse as destruction temples shattered, scrolls burned, cities overrun. But in the case of the Maya lowlands, much of their legacy wasn't destroyed, it was simply swallowed. And in a strange, poetic way, the jungle preserved what time and conquest tried to erase. Throughout the 10th to 18th centuries, Maya ruins lay hidden beneath layers of vines, soil, and silence. Entire cities, like El Mirador and Calakmul, sat invisible to the outside world. Locals sometimes knew of them, calling them old stone hills or places of the gods, but they went unstudied, untouched by maps. And this was a kind of protection. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt or the Colosseum of Rome, Maya cities weren't quarried for stone or turned into museums. They were left to the forest, where strangler figs wove around limestone and howler monkeys screamed through plazas that once echoed with ceremony. This natural camouflage saved thousands of structures, artifacts, and glyphs from early colonial looting. But it also delayed global understanding of the Maya for centuries. It wasn't until the 19th century that the world outside Mesoamerica began to rediscover them, largely by accident. In 1839, American explorer John Lloyd Stevens and British artist Frederick Catherwood journeyed into the Yucatan. What they found stunned them. Massive stepped pyramids, elaborately carved stelae, entire cities frozen in stone. Catherwood's illustrations detailed, shadowed, eerily still brought these ruins into the European imagination for the first time. But even then, misunderstandings bloomed. Many scholars believed the Maya could not have built such structures. Some suggested lost tribes of Israel or Egyptian architects. It was unfathomable in the 1800s that indigenous Americans had achieved this on their own. And yet, the jungle had kept their secrets quietly, like a vault. One of the most famous such rediscoveries happened at Tikal, where in the 1840s, explorers found steep stone temples towering above the canopy. Over time, as excavation advanced, it became clear the jungle hadn't just hidden the city, it had enveloped it, preserving its shape while softening its edges. There's something quietly powerful about this, the idea that nature stepped in where history faltered. Modern technology has deepened this magic. With the rise of LiDAR light detection and ranging researchers now scan entire regions from the air, peeling back the jungle in digital layers. And what they've found has rewritten our understanding of Maya civilization. Tens of thousands of undiscovered structures, hidden road sack biobs stretching across dozens of miles, fortifications, terraces, canals, and minor settlements long believed lost. In 2018, a LiDAR survey revealed that the Maya lowlands may have supported a population of 10 to 15 million at its peak, far higher than earlier estimates. This was not a scattered society of isolated cities. It was a densely interconnected civilization with complex infrastructure, political networks, and regional integration, and all of it was under our feet the whole time. But there's another layer here. The jungle's silence allowed the Maya themselves to remain connected to these sites spiritually, even as the rest of the world forgot them. For many modern Maya, these ruins are not just archaeological zones. They are ancestral spaces, places of memory and meaning. Ceremonies continue today in sacred caves and at altars hidden amid the roots. Pilgrimages are made, offerings left, names whispered in stone. One story tells of a Lakandan Maya man who returned to a ruin with a candle and copal. When asked why, he said simply, "They're still here. They're just sleeping." So imagine it now, a misty morning in the Petane. The calls of toucans echo through the canopy. A carved face watches from behind a curtain of vines, and beneath it, a child traces the shape of a glyph, asking his grandfather what it means. The jungle listens and remembers. The Maya world wasn't erased. It was held in the arms of the forest, waiting for the right eyes to see it again. In the old days, finding a Maya ruin required machetes, months of maps, and a good deal of luck. But now, with satellites, LiDAR scans, and machine learning, entire cities emerge from jungle in digital clarity. And with each discovery, the past grows louder. In 2018, scientists scanned more than 2,000 square kilometers in northern Guatemala using airborne laser technology. The results? More than 60,000 previously unknown structures, roads, terraces, city walls, evidence of vast, complex urban landscapes that had long been invisible beneath the trees. It was a revelation. Not only did it prove the Maya were far more interconnected than we'd assumed, it challenged everything we thought we knew about their population, economy, and engineering. One archaeologist described it as a game changer, like putting glasses on after being blurry for decades. LiDAR works by sending thousands of laser pulses per second down through the forest canopy. Most bounce off leaves, but a few hit the ground, and those are enough to map the landscape underneath without touching a single stone. The scans revealed that the classic Maya lowlands were not scattered cities in isolated forest, but a networked civilization, tied together by sac-oblong straight causeways, connecting even modest settlements. Some of these causeways stretched for over 20 kilometers, elevated and paved with white plaster that would have gleamed in moonlight. Cities like El Mirador, once considered remote, were now understood to be massive urban hubs, with central temples rivaling those of Tikal or Calakmul, and surrounding them, a checkerboard of terrace fields, irrigation canals, reservoirs, and housing clusters. This wasn't chaos, it was planning, and it told a different story. For decades, the Maya were often characterized as isolated forest dwellers, mystical but primitive. But these LiDAR maps, vivid, precise, digital, suggest something else. A civilization of architects, hydrologists, and logisticians. A civilization managing water, space, and movement with millennia of inherited knowledge. One quiet detail. The scans also uncovered defensive structures. Moats, walls, ramparts. These weren't just ceremonial cities, they were protected spaces. Some scholars believe these defenses were constructed late in the Classic period, possibly in response to rising warfare and internal unrest. Others interpret them as signs of territorial governance evidence that the Maya had evolved systems of border control and military coordination more sophisticated than previously believed. And yet, for all their scale and intricacy, these findings raise new questions too. Why, with such urban complexity, did collapse come so quickly? Were these systems too tightly wound, vulnerable to even small environmental disruptions? Or does the digital map hide as much as it reveals flattening human experience into grids and elevation lines? The academic community remains split. Some researchers argue that the LiDAR data confirms theories of overpopulation and ecological exhaustion, that the Maya lowlands became victims of their own brilliance, building so successfully that their landscape could no longer sustain them. Others warn against reading too much into infrastructure. They caution, a complex map doesn't guarantee political unity or cultural stability. It shows possibility, not inevitability. But what no one denies is this: the Maya were never small, they were never simple, they were never lost. They were just hidden in plain sight. Their roads grown over, their cities blurred into green. And now, as technology uncovers more, we begin to ask, what else is out there? What stories are still waiting beneath the leaves? How many cities lie beneath our feet as we walk through what we thought was wilderness? So picture it now. A drone buzzes overhead. Beneath it, a jungle canopithic, untouched. But through the digital eye, a city emerges. Pyramids, roads, temples, homes. A world reappearing, pixel by pixel. And somewhere below, a farmer walks a forest path that was once a sacred road, never knowing that each step he takes follows the footprints of 1,000 years. The past is not gone. It's waiting to be remembered. It's easy to look at the end of a civilization and ask, why? But the more profound question might be, what does it mean to collapse and still exist? Because by the time Spanish ships approached the shores of Mesoamerica in the early 1500s, the great Maya cities of the Classic period had long since emptied. The stone plazas lay under leaf and soil. The kings of Tikal and Calakmul were names whispered in old myths, not rulers of armies. But the Maya themselves, they were still there. And the Spanish, armed with steel, guns, and unfamiliar gods, found not an extinct people but a living, adapting culture. What followed was not a discovery. It was a collision. The Spanish conquest of the Maya world was slower and more fragmented than their march through the Aztec Empire. Why? Because there was no single Maya capital to take, no singular emperor to capture. The Maya were decentralized, politically fractured, but that same disunity became a strange strength. There was no head to sever, no empire to topple in a single blow. Instead, the conquest took nearly 2 centuries. From 1524, when Pedro de Alvarado began his brutal campaign through the Guatemalan highlands, to 1697, when the last Maya city of Tayasal and Lake Petén Itzá fell. The Spanish encountered wave after wave of resistance, retreat, and resilience. One of the most remarkable stories is that of the Itzá Maya. They ruled from Tayasal, a city built on an island in the middle of a lake. Surrounded by water, protected by dense jungle, and fiercely independent, the Itzá kept their traditions alive even as other Maya groups were subdued. Spanish missionaries came and went. Soldiers attempted invasions. But for over 150 years, the Itza defied them. When the Spanish finally captured Tayasal in 1697, they found pyramids still standing, ball courts still used, and rituals still practiced beneath starlight. The world the classic Maya had built may have fallen politically, but spiritually and culturally it had survived. One small but powerful detail: after the conquest, many Maya continued to carve glyphs in secret, on cave walls, on church bells, even into wood and clay hidden under homes. These weren't royal inscriptions anymore, they were acts of cultural survival. And yet, the colonial period brought enormous trauma. The Maya faced forced conversions, epidemics, land seizure, and the dismantling of social structures. Catholic churches were built atop sacred sites. Indigenous languages were suppressed. Calendars burned. The very act of speaking your ancestral name became dangerous. But the Maya adapted again. Some adopted new rituals, blending Catholic saints with older gods. Others preserved traditions in cofradias, brotherhoods that acted as both spiritual guardians and community leaders. And in isolated regions, mountains, jungles, distant valleys, the old beliefs never stopped. To this day, festivals like Aj Kij, daykeeping, continue to observe the sacred calendar. Fire ceremonies still take place on solstices and eclipses, and when elders kneel before a cave, offering candles and sugar, they are not performing folklore. They are continuing a line of worship unbroken for over 0 years. But perhaps the most haunting legacy is this: most Maya cities were already in ruins before the Spanish arrived. The collapse had happened centuries earlier. And the Spanish didn't cause it, they walked into its aftermath, misunderstanding it, rewriting it. They assumed the Maya were gone. They assumed the jungle had reclaimed a people, not just their temples. They were wrong. Even now, historians debate, was this truly a collapse, or just a transformation so profound that it looked like silence from the outside? Some scholars argue we should retire the word entirely, that what happened wasn't a fall, but a change in form from centralized cities to dispersed villages, from written history to oral memory, from divine kings to community elders. So tonight, picture the lake at Tayasal, still, dark, encircled by forest. A canoe approaches. Inside, a Maya priest whispers to the water. His city may soon fall, but his world will not. Because collapse isn't always the end. Sometimes it's just another way of beginning again. The question lingers like low mist over the rainforest floor. Did the Maya collapse because of war or drought? Or was it something else, something slower, more internal, more human? Even now, the answer slips between branches and glyphs. It's not one thing, it's many things, woven together in vines and time. To understand the fall of the classic Maya cities, we must accept complexity. There was warfare evident in glyphs of captured kings and toppled stelae. There was drought etched in lakebed sediments and cave crystals, dry years stacked upon each other like brittle maize stalks. There was overexploitation, the clearing of forests for fuel, for fields, for kings' demands. There was political fragmentation, as alliances failed and rulers became weaker symbols of cosmic order. But maybe at its core, the collapse was not an event, but a disruption of balance. The Maya world was built on interwoven systems between people and nature, kings and cosmos, cities and countryside. When too many threads frayed at once, the fabric didn't tear, it thinned, stretched, then slowly dissolved. Yet collapse isn't the only way to interpret what followed. Some see it as a great decentralization movement away from monumental centers toward a more diffuse way of living. Others suggest it was a cultural shift, a recalibration of values, with religion and ritual moving from pyramids to kitchens, from public courts to sacred caves. Archaeology, for all its rigor, doesn't give us closure. For every glyph translated, another waits, eroded or buried. For every site uncovered, 100 remain hidden. And for every theory proposed, another offers a different rhythm of truth. There is a haunting beauty in this. The Maya story is not a puzzle with a single answer. It's a continuum, unfolding still. Today, young Maya scholars learn to read the glyphs their ancestors carved. Communities protect sacred springs and celebrate the Hab and Sokin calendars. Satellite maps reveal temples aligned with the stars. And in quiet, ceremonies under jungle trees, candles flicker beside old stones. One recent discovery stunned researchers. A 9th century stela in the Puk region, left blank. It had the carved frame, the raised platform, the ceremonial positioning, but the glyphs absent. Some believe it was meant for a ruler who never rose. Others see it as a deliberate silencia moment, when the Maya themselves chose not to speak into stone. Maybe that's what collapse is. Sometimes. A pause, a breath, a letting go of one kind of world to allow another to rise in its place. So, tonight, imagine this. A forest path winding beneath the moon. Roots curl over a staircase that once led to a palace. A fire burns low in a clearing, and beside it, an elder tells a child the story of the day the rains didn't come and the people turned their eyes to the stars, and the world began to whisper itself into a different shape. Not gone, not lost, just changed. Because the Maya did not disappear. They are still here. Their stories are in the wind, in the maze, and the stones that wait patiently beneath the leaves. All you have to do is listen. Now, let your breathing slow. The jungle is quiet again. The kings have stepped back into the earth, and the stars hang where the Maya once studied them, silently crossing the night. Imagine the temple stones, warm from sun, now cool with moonlight, and the trees whispering old stories through their leaves. Somewhere, a sacred fire has gone out, but the smoke curls upward like a memory, gentle and unbroken. You are drifting now through time, through forest, through echoing chambers where history still hums. Tonight, there are no questions to answer, only rhythms to feel. And as your thoughts soften and the world quiets, I'll leave you here, safe in the arms of a civilization that never really left us, still watching, still dreaming, still here.